The rain had been coming down on Halden Falls for 9 straight days, and nobody at St. Ambrose spared a glance for the new nurse who worked through all of it. She took every double shift. She swallowed every insult from the charge desk. She never once raised her voice. On the schedule, she was Nora Vance, the quiet fill-in who wiped up the messes the janitors missed. Then the mountain tore itself open. 8 black helicopters fell out of a dead gray sky onto the parking lot, and the soldiers who came staggering through the doors did not ask for the chief of surgery. They asked for the ferryman, but that was later. First, there was only the rain. St. Ambrose Community Hospital sat at the bottom of a fir-covered valley in the Oregon Cascades, a low brick building with a leaking gutter and a generator that hummed a half-step flat. It was what the state called a critical access hospital, which was a gentle way of saying it had fewer than 24 beds, and no business handling anything worse than a chainsaw accident or a logging truck that met a guardrail. On a normal Thursday, the emergency department saw a sprained ankle from the middle school gym, a toddler who swallowed a button battery, an old man from the trailer park with his blood sugar gone sideways. The staff liked it quiet. Quiet was why most of them had come to a town like this in the first place. Nora Vance had come for the quiet too, or so the paperwork suggested. She was somewhere in her late 30s, though the fluorescent light in the medroom made her look younger, and the tired set of her mouth made her look older. She had been at St. Ambrose for 2 months. Her file was as plain as unbuttered toast. A nursing degree from a state school nobody had heard of, a few years at a veterans clinic in Arizona, a soft gap in her work history that she explained when anyone bothered to ask, as time spent caring for a dying aunt. Nobody asked twice. To the other nurses, she was almost furniture. She was the one who restocked the pediatric crash cart before anyone noticed it was low. She was the one who found the vein on the frightened old women when everyone else had given up and blamed the patient. She wore navy scrubs, a size too big. Sleeves always pulled down to the wrist, even in the stuffy back rooms, and she kept her dark hair in a tight, low knot that never came loose. She kept her left hand moving, busy occupied, always doing something so that no one would notice the pale, ropey scars across the back of it, or the way 2 of the fingers did not quite curl all the way closed. And she was the favorite target of Marla Quint. Marla had run the floor at St. Ambrose for 19 years, and she governed it with a laminated clipboard and a voice that could strip paint. She was the kind of woman who measured her own worth by how small she could make the people beneath her feel. "Vance," Marla called out across the nurses' station, not looking up from her computer. "Did you recount the narcotics box in room 2? Because if I am short, 1 vial when the pharmacy audit hits, it is coming out of your license, not mine." Nora did not stop folding the warm blankets she had just pulled from the warmer. "Count is done, Marla. Logged and initialed. Nothing missing." Her voice was flat and easy, no edge to it at all, and that was precisely the thing that drove Marla up the wall. Marla ran on friction. A person who refused to give her any was a person she could not get a grip on. "Do it again," Marla said. "And when you are finished, go turn the patient in 4. Dr. Ashford is doing a consult in there, and he does not want to be interrupted by chatter. Dr. Julian Ashford was the department's crown jewel and never let anyone forget it. He was 31, an attending who had done his residency at Stanford and mentioned it roughly as often as most people breathed. He kept his scrubs tailored, his hair styled, and a habit of speaking to the nursing staff as though they were slightly slow children whose only purpose in life was to fetch his coffee and admire his charts. Nora simply nodded and stepped away from the desk. She moved through the corridor without a sound. A person watching closely might have noticed that her sneakers made no squeak on the wet linoleum, that her eyes swept the exits and the blind corner by the supply room and the hands of everyone she passed before they landed on any face. But no one at St. Ambrose was watching closely. Watching closely was not something the valley demanded of anyone. In the corner of the med room, half hidden behind the pill counter, a young woman in brand new scrubs was quietly falling apart. Priya Nair was 23 and 4 days into her first job as a licensed nurse. She had a smart phone case covered in cartoon cats and a nursing school lanyard she had not yet worked up the nerve to replace with a hospital badge. Right now, she was staring at an IV pump like it was a bomb, her hands shaking, tears sitting hot in the corners of her eyes because she had tried to program it 3 times and the machine kept beeping an error she did not understand, and Marla had already snapped at her twice. "It is occluded," Nora said, gently appearing at her shoulder without warning. "Not your fault. The line has a kink up under the tape. See it?" Priya jumped. "I did not hear you come in. Nobody ever does." Nora reached past her, ran 2 fingers along the tubing, found the pinch under the dressing, and smoothed it flat with a single unhurried motion. The pump settled into a soft, steady rhythm. She did it with her right hand. The left stayed low close to her body, the sleeve tugged down over the knuckles. "How?" Priya breathed. "I have been fighting that for 5 minutes. You were fighting the machine. The machine is almost never the problem." Nora almost smiled. "Follow the line back to the patient. Always. The answer lives closer to the person than you think." Priya looked at her, the way a drowning swimmer looks at a rope. "Marla said I am too slow. She said I am going to kill somebody. Marla says a lot of things." Nora picked up a warm blanket from the stack in her arms and set it in the girl's hands. "Go put this on the woman in bed 6. She is cold, and she is scared, and nobody has spoken to her in an hour. That is nursing. The pumps you will learn. The rest of it either lives in you or it does not. And I already know it lives in you. I watched you sit with that kid during the LP yesterday. You did not let go of his hand once." Something in Priya's chest unclenched a notch. She nodded, wiped her face with her wrist, and went. Nora watched her go, and for just a moment the tiredness in her face cracked open into something like tenderness, and then it closed again. She turned back toward room 2 to recount narcotics that she had already counted correctly, because it was easier than arguing, because arguing got people noticed, and being noticed was the one thing Nora Vance could not afford. She had a rule. She had lived by it for a long time now. Stay small. Save the ones you can quietly. Never let anyone see the whole of you, because the last time people saw the whole of her, it had cost more than she could ever pay back. Outside, the rain kept falling on the firs, steady and gray and endless, and the flat generator hummed its half-step below. True and 30 miles up the mountain sealed behind a fence line that appeared on no public map. A machine that was never supposed to exist, finished spooling up toward a number it was never supposed to reach. Nora did not know that yet, but some old animal part of her, the part that had learned to sleep with one eye toward the door, had been restless all week. She kept catching herself counting the exits. She kept smelling the rain and thinking of another place, another storm, a mountain far from this one, where the sky had come apart over her head. She told herself it was nothing. 9 days of rain would put anyone on edge. She was wrong about the nothing. She would be proven wrong in about 2 hours. The afternoon lull settled over the department like silt. Marla went back to browsing a home decor website with the brazen openness of a woman who feared no consequence. Elliot Park, the charge nurse on shift, worked through the discharge paperwork at the far end of the desk, a mild, soft-spoken man in his 40s who avoided conflict the way cats avoid bathwater. Dr. Ashford leaned against the counter with a cold brew coffee, complaining to a physician assistant about the golf simulator he was thinking of installing in his garage. Nora restocked. It was what she did. She kept her hands full and her head down and her eyes moving. The doors hissed open and a woman came in half carrying her husband. He was a big man in a flannel shirt, maybe 55, gone the color of wet cement, one hand pressed flat to the center of his chest. His wife was talking fast, the way frightened people do, saying he had been fine at lunch, and then he had said his back felt like something had torn, and now he could not get comfortable, and he kept saying it was moving. Elliot got them into bed, 3. Ashford wandered over with his coffee still in his hand. "Okay," Ashford said, glancing at the monitor as a tech clipped it on. "Blood pressure, 140/90 on the right arm. Heart rate 90. He is anxious. Let us not overcomplicate a simple thing." "It moved," the man said through gritted teeth. "It started up here, and now it is down in my gut. Feels like something is peeling." "Sir, describe the pain for me." "Sharp crushing. Ripping," the man said, "like a zipper." Ashford nodded, the way people nod when they have already stopped listening. He pressed on the man's belly, listened to his chest for 8 seconds, and straightened up. "Chest is clear. Belly is soft. My guess is a bad muscle strain and a healthy dose of anxiety. You had a scare, your body is running on adrenaline, and you have talked yourself into thinking it is your heart. It happens to strong men all the time, actually. We will get an EKG to be safe, give you something to settle the nerves, and send you home." Nora was hanging a bag of saline on the pole in bed, 1 curtain away. She did not turn around, but her hands had gone still, and her head had tilted a fraction, the way a person tilts their head toward a sound only they can hear. Ripping pain that migrated. A big man with the build for years of untreated blood pressure. And there was something else, something Ashford had not checked because he had already decided the story. She stepped around the curtain. Quiet eyes lowered the picture of a nurse who knew her place. "Dr. Ashford, would you like me to grab a blood pressure on the other arm while the tech sets up the EKG, saves you a step?" Ashford turned to look at her, the way a man looks at a vending machine that has spoken to him. "The other arm, for symmetry, doctor. You know how it is with the bigger gentlemen. Cuff-size muscle. Sometimes one side reads high. I only mean to save you a callback if the numbers look funny later." She kept her voice soft and slightly apologetic, sanding every edge off it. "A Stanford man like you would want the clean picture for the chart." The flattery landed exactly where she aimed it. Ashford's chest lifted 1/2 inch. "Well, yes. Thoroughness. Fine, do the other arm, it costs us nothing." She wrapped the cuff on the left. She already knew. She had known from across the room, from the gray of the man's face and the way he cradled the right side of his neck without realizing he was doing it. The machine chewed on it and spat out a number. 92/60, a gap of nearly 50 points between the 2 arms. The physician assistant frowned at it. Ashford's coffee stopped halfway to his mouth. "That is a wide differential," Nora murmured, still gentle. Still lowering her eyes, feeding him the thread, and letting him believe he was the one pulling it. Almost 50 between the arms, with a tearing pain that started high and traveled down. "I am sure it is nothing, doctor. I only worry that a dissection of the aorta can present exactly like a muscle strain in a man this size, and a strain we can send home. But the other thing, well, you would know far better than me." The word dissection dropped into the little curtain space and changed the temperature of it. Ashford set his coffee down. The bravado drained out of his face and left it younger and more frightened than he would ever admit. Because he did know somewhere under the arrogance that a torn aorta was the kind of thing that killed a man in the parking lot on his way to the car, and that discharging one was the kind of mistake that ended careers and appeared in lawsuits read aloud to juries. "Get me a CT angiogram," he said, and his voice had lost its lecturing music. "Now. And call the vascular line at the trauma center. Tell them we may have a transfer. And do not let him stand up. Keep him flat. Keep him calm." The scan lit it up in white and gray. A tear ran the length of the man's aorta, a false channel filling with blood, alongside the true one, a wall peeling apart exactly the way he had described. If he had walked out with a prescription for muscle relaxants and a lecture about his nerves, he would have been dead before the 10-day rain let up. Ashford stood in front of the monitor and stared at it. To his credit, some flicker of honesty moved across his face. He knew how close it had been. He knew who had steered him. For a moment, it looked like he might say something to the quiet nurse in the oversized scrubs. Then the moment passed, and the old habit closed over it. "Good thing I pushed on the second pressure," he said to the physician assistant, straightening his collar. "You have to look past the obvious with these presentations. Textbook trap. Get him packaged for transfer." Nora was already gone. She had slipped back behind the curtain the instant the diagnosis was certain, back to hanging saline and folding blankets, because she did not need the credit, and never had. She needed the man to live. That was the whole of it. Stay small, save the ones you can leave before anyone can look at you too long. But this time, someone had looked. Priya was standing at the end of the hall with a warm blanket forgotten in her arms, and she had seen the entire thing. She had watched Nora read a dying man from 20 feet away through a gap in a curtain. She had watched her hand the diagnosis to the doctor so carefully wrapped in flattery that he thought he had unwrapped it himself. She had watched her vanish before a single word of thanks could find her. She followed Nora into the medroom wide-eyed. "You knew. Before he even touched him, you knew." "I noticed a few things," Nora said, not looking up from the supply drawer. "So did the doctor. That is why he ordered the scan." "That is not what happened, and you know it." Priya lowered her voice. "How did you know to check the other arm?" That is not a thing they teach you to see. Where did you learn to do that?" Nora's right hand paused on the edge of the drawer. Something crossed her face quick as a bird's shadow there, and gone. Somewhere far away, and years ago in a canvas tent, with the wind screaming outside, and a young soldier's blood pressure crashing in one arm while it held in the other. She had learned it the way you learn anything that matters, which is by nearly failing to and never forgetting the cost. "Arizona," she said. "The Veterans Clinic. You see a lot of old men with a lot of years of high blood pressure. After a while, you start to recognize the shape of it." She closed the drawer. "That is all. You will see it too in 20 years. Now go give that blanket to somebody before it goes cold in your arms." It was a good answer. It was smooth and plausible, and it fit the plain little file with the plain little gap. Priya almost believed it. Almost. But she had grown up with a grandmother who could tell a coming storm by the ache in her knees, and she knew the difference between a person who had studied a thing and a person who had survived it. And there was something in the way Nora Vance stood, something in the way she had crossed that curtained space, without a sound, the way she had already known where all of this was going, before anyone else in the room had caught up, that did not fit a quiet fill-in nurse from a clinic in the desert. Priya did not push it. She took the blanket and went, but she carried the question with her, and she would remember it later when the sky came apart. And the woman she had been quietly pitying all week reached up and pulled the pins out of her hair and became someone else entirely. Across the department, Marla Quint watched Nora walk back to the supply room and felt the familiar itch of a woman who could not stand a thing she could not diagnose. She did not know what Nora Vance was. She only knew the woman never flinched, never bit back, never broke. And to Marla, that was not peace. That was a locked door. And Marla hated a locked door more than almost anything in the world. "Vance," she called. "The linen delivery is here. Go count it." "Yes, Marla," Nora said, and went to count linen, and outside the rain kept falling, and up the mountain the number kept climbing. That night after her shift, Nora sat in her truck in the empty staff lot with the rain drumming on the roof and did not turn the key. She did this sometimes. Sat in the dark with the engine off and let the memory come. because she had learned long ago that a memory you refuse to face will wait for you in your sleep instead. And she preferred to meet hers awake, where she had some say in when it ended. The rain helped and hurt in equal measure. The smell of it coming through the cracked window, wet earth and cold stone and crushed cedar, was the same smell the world had the morning everything ended. People thought a desert was all sand. The place she had spent the last of her old life was a high, cold country of rock and thin air, and when the storms came off the peaks, they came fast and mean, and they smelled like this. Like rain on stone, like the last good thing before the fall. She had been Lieutenant Colonel Renata Salazar then. The men she flew with had another name for her, one that started as gallows humor and hardened over the years into something they said with their hats off. They called her the ferryman because she was the one who carried them across. Not to the other side. Back. Back from the edge, back from the dark water, back into the ugly, bright miracle of one more day alive. She ran a small surgical team that jumped in light and fast to the worst places on earth, a folding table and a cooler of blood, and a pair of hands close enough to the fighting that the golden hour never had to be spent, bleeding in the back of an aircraft. Golden hour. That was the whole idea. Get to them inside the hour that decides. She had a coin for it, a heavy challenge. Coin the team had struck themselves, a ferry boat on one side, and a single word on the other. And she carried it still, worn smooth as a river stone in the bottom of her locker. She was the best there had ever been at it. She knew that the way you know an unkind fact about yourself without pride, the way you know your own blood type. The record said so. The men she carried said so. 200 and some souls dragged back across the water by those hands. And then, a storm off the peaks, and a bird full of her team, and a package of wounded, and a shoulder-fired rocket that nobody saw coming through the weather. She did not let herself watch the whole of it even now. She let herself have the pieces she could survive. The world turning over. The taste of copper and rain. Her own left hand crushed under something she never identified the nerves in it. Dying while she used the other hand to work because there were men alive in the wreck, and a surgeon does not get to faint. She had carried 3 of them out into that storm with one working hand, and half of her hearing gone forever from the blast, the left ear taking a notch of shrapnel that she still could not hear a whisper on. She had kept 2 of the 3 breathing until the second bird came. She had lost one. She still knew his name. She would always know his name. When the accounting was done, the record showed that Lieutenant Colonel Renata Salazar had died in that wreck. There were reasons the record said so, some of them political, and some of them merciful, and the truth was, she had let it stand. She had come out the far side of that storm, with a hand that would never hold a scalpel, the old way, an ear that would never hear a heart murmur again, and a thing inside her that had simply worn through, the way a rope wears through if you drag enough weight over it for enough years. 200 souls. You do not carry 200 souls across the water and come back whole. Something has to be spent for the crossing. She had spent herself, so she let the ferryman drown. She took the plain name off an aunt's maiden line. She found a valley where the rain smelled like the mountain, but nothing else did, and she went to work saving the ones she could quietly, one frightened old woman at a time, asking nothing, taking no credit, wanting only to be left alone with the small good she could still do. The order that signed off on the mission that killed her team had a name at the bottom of it. She had read that name in the after-action report 100 times in the first year, in the worst of the nights. The task force commander, who had weighed the weather and the intelligence and the risk, and had judged it acceptable. She did not hate him. That surprised people on the rare occasion she ever said it aloud, which was never. She did not hate him because she had sat in that same seat herself, made that same brutal arithmetic, sent people into weather, because the mission on the ground could not wait. He had made a defensible call, and it had cost her everything, and both of those things were true at once. And living inside that contradiction was part of what had worn the rope through. His name was Aaron Fenn. Last she had heard before she stopped listening to any of it, he had made Major General. She would not think of him tonight. Nora opened her scarred left hand in the dark and looked at it, the fingers that would not fully close the pale rope of the scars, catching the lot lights. In the clinic, she kept it moving, kept it busy, so that no one would see what it was. But the truth, the private truth she never said, was that the hand still worked when it had to. It shook when she remembered. It went dead steady when someone was dying. She did not understand why. She had stopped trying to. Some part of her had made a bargain a long time ago in a canvas tent, with the wind screaming that as long as there was a hand and a heart in front of it that could still be started, the hand would do what the heart could not, and the shaking could wait. She closed the hand. She put the memory away gently, the way you close a drawer, with something breakable in it. She started the truck. Inside her locker, 30 feet away through the brick and the rain, the coin sat in the dark, with its ferry boat and its single word, waiting the way it had waited for years, for the one day the ferryman would be needed again. That day was coming faster than she knew. It was already loaded onto 8 aircraft that had not yet left the ground. It was already spooling up inside a machine on a mountain 30 miles north, a machine wearing the flag of a program so black it had no name. A civilian would ever hear a program whose safety envelope had once in another life been reviewed and signed by a surgeon the world believed was dead. She drove home through the rain and slept for once without dreaming. She would need the rest. It happened at 14 minutes past 3 the following afternoon. The department was caught in the deep trough of a wet Thursday. Marla was at the desk, ordering something for her patio. Ashford was in the break room narrating his morning to a resident who had rotated in from the trauma center for the week and clearly regretted it. Elliot was refilling the printer. Priya was learning to spike a bag of blood under Nora's quiet supervision, her tongue between her teeth, her hands steadier than they had been the day before. Nora stood beside her, half her attention on the girl, and half of it always on the doors and the windows and the gray wall of rain beyond them. Then the rain changed. It did not stop. It did not slow. It went for one impossible half-second, silent the way the world goes silent when something enormous and far away shoves the air ahead of it. A pressure wave rolled down the valley and pressed against the glass of the ambulance bay, against the eardrums of everyone in the building. A thing felt more than heard. Loose panes buzzed in their frames. A stack of paper cups slid off the counter. And in Nora's ruined left ear, the one that had heard nothing but silence for years, a high, thin ringing started up the ghost of a sound she knew in her bones. She went still. Completely, instantly still, the way a deer goes still. The blood bag hung forgotten from her fingers. Her shoulders, which had spent 2 months rounded, and small, dropped and squared, as if a hand had reached down and set her spine straight. Her chin came up, her eyes unfocused, read something written on the air that no one else in the room could see. High-order detonation, deep underground, a long way north up the valley, bigger than anything that had a right to be up there. What was that? Marla said, taking off her reading glasses. Was that thunder? That was not thunder, Nora said. Nobody heard her, or nobody wanted to. Before Marla could correct her for speaking without being spoken, to the red phone on the wall began to ring. Not the ordinary line. The dedicated emergency line to county dispatch, a harsh, insistent mechanical ring, built to cut through a busy room, ringing now into a room gone dead. Quiet. At the same instant, the police scanner on the shelf, which murmured all day about traffic stops and welfare checks, hissed once and went to dead air. The overhead lights flickered. The generator outside caught the load with a lurch, and its flat half-step hum climbed and steadied. Elliot got to the phone first. St. Ambrose charge nurse. He listened. 3 seconds. The color left his face from the top down like water draining out of a glass. His hand began to shake so badly the heavy receiver clattered against his jaw. "Say that again," he whispered. "How many? Say the number again." He hung up very slowly and turned around, and the whole room was already looking at him. "That was dispatch," Elliot said. His voice did not sound like his own. "There's been an event at the Antler Ridge Range, up past the ridge line. Some kind of, they said, a catastrophic failure during a test. Underground. Then a second collapse on top of the first one trapped the response teams that went in. Ashford had come out of the break room. He laughed the short, ugly laugh of a man who wants very badly for a thing to be a joke. Antler Ridge. That old logging range. What a fuel tank went up. We will get a few burns." "Antler Ridge is not a logging range, Doctor," Nora said. Everyone turned. The voice had come out different. Gone was the soft, apologetic murmur she used at the desk. This voice was low and clipped, and it carried to every corner of the room without being raised at all. "It is a leased test facility," she said. "A company called Halcyon Dynamics runs advanced propulsion work out of there under a federal defense contract. Deep tunnels bored into the granite, classified programs. Nothing that happens on that mountain is small." Marla stared at her. "How in God's name would you know that?" Nora did not answer. She could not answer, because the true answer was that in another life she had sat in a windowless room in Virginia and read the safety envelope for that exact program, that exact facility, and had signed her true name to a review that said the containment margins were too thin, and had been thanked and overruled, and had walked out and never thought of it again until this half-second, when the mountain proved her right in the worst possible way. Elliot saved her from having to say any of it. "Listen to me. The highway is out. There was a slide, the whole cut above mile 40 came down with the rain. It took the road and the bridge over the gorge with it. The Level 1 Trauma Center is on the far side of that slide. They are cut off from the blast site completely." He swallowed. "We are the closest hospital that anything can reach. The military has jurisdiction. They are bringing the casualties here." "Fine," Ashford said, too fast, rubbing his hands together, trying to climb back on top of his own fear. "Fine. So we get some casualties. We have 3 trauma bays. We call in the on-call surgeon, we set up a couple of extra rooms we manage." "You are not hearing him," Nora said quietly. "How many, Elliot?" she said. Elliot looked at her, and then he looked at the whole room, and his mouth worked twice before the number came out. "They said prepare for more than 40. They said at least 31 of them are critical. Inbound now. Minutes out." The number landed in the room like a body. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the panic came up through the floor all at once. Marla made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. 31 critical. 31. We have 2 ventilators. We have 1 surgeon on call, and he is 40 minutes away in the rain, on a road that is falling apart. We are a critical access hospital. We are 22 beds and a leaky roof. This is not a trauma center. This is a first aid station with a parking lot. Ashford had started to pace fast tight, little circuits, one hand dragging through his careful hair, muttering about protocols and liability, and who was going to be legally responsible for the ones they could not save. The rotating resident stood frozen against the wall. Elliot gripped the edge of the desk with both hands, as if the floor were tilting. Priya looked at the blood bag still in her hands, and then at all the adults falling to pieces around her, and her eyes went huge and wet. And underneath all of it growing came a sound. It started as a low rhythmic thrumming felt in the teeth and the breastbone before the ears caught up to it. Then it built, doubling and doubling, a heavy chopping roar rolling down the valley, and bouncing off the fur-covered walls of it, until the reinforced glass of the ambulance bay began to buzz and then to rattle in its frames. The rain on the lot outside broke apart, whipped sideways, torn into a spinning silver mist by a wind that came from nowhere the weather had promised. Elliot turned to the security monitor above the desk, and what he saw drained the last of the panic out of his face and replaced it with something closer to awe. The gray sky over the little parking lot of St. Ambrose was full of aircraft. Nora Vance closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. In the private dark behind them, she said something that might have been a name, or an apology, or a prayer to no one. When she opened them, the quiet fill-in nurse was gone. She set the blood bag down on the counter very gently and reached up and pulled the first pin out of her hair. One by one, the pins came out, and she dropped them on the counter, and her dark hair came down around a face that had changed completely. The tiredness was still there, but it had gone hard, purposeful. The tiredness of a soldier, and not a victim. She shrugged off the oversized navy jacket and let it fall, and under it was a fitted, long-sleeve shirt that she pushed up to the elbows, without hesitating, and there, in the flat overhead light, were the scars for anyone to see. The ropey damage across the back of her left hand, the pale burn that climbed her forearm, the marks of a life spent somewhere none of them could imagine. "Elliot," she said, and her voice cracked across the room like something breaking clean. "Call the blood bank. Every unit of O negative you have. Thaw it, pack it in coolers, and carry it here by hand. Do not wait for the tube system, and do not use the elevator. Take the stairs. Go now." Elliot went. He did not question it. Something in the sound of her had reached down past his fear and found the part of him that knew how to obey a person who knew what they were doing. Marla found her voice shrill and rising. "Who do you think you are? You do not give orders on my floor. You are a fill-in. You have been here 2 months. You do not." Nora crossed the space between them in 3 strides and stopped close enough that Marla had to tip her head back. She did not shout. She did not touch her. She only looked at her, and whatever Marla saw in that look shut her mouth in the middle of the word. "Marla." Nora said, low and even, "In about 90 seconds, this building is going to fill up with dying men faster than you have ever imagined. Dying men could arrive. You can be useful, or you can be in the way. And I don't have the time to carry you if you choose to be in the way. Every crash cart on this floor, out in the main corridor, lined against the wall right now. Every warm blanket, every liter of saline. Go." For 19 years, Marla Quint had ruled this floor with a laminated clipboard, and in 19 years, no one had ever spoken to her. With that flat certainty, the certainty of a person for whom disobedience is simply not one of the available outcomes. She backed up a step, then she turned and ran to line up the carts, and some small, buried, honest part of her was relieved because for the first time all day, someone in the building sounded like they knew what was about to happen. Nora turned to the room and took hold of it. "Dr. Ashford, Bay 1, you are on airways and only airways. If a patient cannot breathe, you make them breathe, and then you move to the next one. Intubate or bag them and hand them off, but you do not stop. You do not fixate. You do not fall in love with one patient while 3 others suffocate in the hall. Can you do that?" Ashford stared at her. "You cannot. You are a nurse. You cannot run a mass casualty out of an emergency. Can you keep an airway open, yes or no?" Not unkind, just absolute. He swallowed. Something in him, some Stanford-trained core of competence buried under all that vanity, reached for the lifeline of a clear, simple task. "Yes, airways, I can do that." "Then do that and nothing else, and you will save more lives today than you have in your whole career." She was already turning, already pulling a fistful of black permanent markers from a drawer and pressing them into the resident's hands and Priya's. Triage happens at the doors. You do not let a single litter past you without a mark on it. Green can walk and talk. Send them to the cafeteria, someone will get to them. Yellow is hurt, but holding. They go to the far hall. Red is dying, but savable, they come to me. If you truly cannot tell, you err toward red, and you let me sort it. Priya. Priya's head snapped up. You stay on my shoulder. You are my hands. When I say a thing, you do it, and you do not think about whether you can, you just move, and I will not let you make a mistake that matters. Understand? And Priya, 4 days a nurse, terrified, looked into the face of the woman she had been quietly pitying all week and found that she was not afraid anymore, because the person giving the orders was not afraid. And courage turns out to be a thing you can catch from another person, like warmth from a fire. Yes, she said. Yes, ma'am. Nora reached under the counter and pulled out a heavy trauma bag, packed and ready, that no one had ever seen her carry in, that had been sitting there since the pressure wave first hit the glass, because some part of her had started getting ready the instant the rain went silent. Gowns and gloves, she said. Everyone. Move. Then the first helicopter touched down, and the doors blew open, and the war came inside. The downwash was a living thing. It tore the awning off the ambulance bay and folded it like paper. It flipped an empty wheelchair. End over end across the lot, it drove the rain sideways through the open doors in a stinging sheet. Through it came the smell, and Nora knew the smell before the first litter cleared the threshold, the smell that lived under all the other smells of her old life, hot metal and scorched fuel, and the deep copper reek of massive blood loss. The aircraft were matte black. No red crosses, no white paint, no unit markings, no tail numbers. Modified and dark and purposeful, the transport of men whose work did not get written down. And out of them came the operators. Big men in torn plate carriers smeared with soot, and other men's blood-dragging litters, carrying comrades over their shoulders. Their faces the grim, blown-out masks of people who have been in hell for an hour and did not expect to find a rescue this small at the end of it. The lead man kicked a litter through the doors ahead of him and roared into the chaos. I need a surgeon! Somebody tell me you have a surgeon! He was enormous, a mountain of a man, with a beard gone stiff with dried blood that was not his. On the litter was a young soldier, whose right leg ended in a ragged ruin high in the thigh, and the field tourniquet cinched above the wound was losing the fight, and blood was coming out of him in bright, rhythmic pulses that pooled and spread across the clean floor in seconds. Ashford took one look at the sheer volume of it and froze, solid hands, half-raised mouth open, every year of his expensive education deserting him at once. This was not a textbook. This was an artery emptying a man onto the linoleum. Move, doctor, Nora said, and she was already down. She hit her knees in the spreading blood without a flicker of hesitation, and her hands went to work at a speed that made the big operator stop breathing. She saw it in one pass. The vessel had retracted up into the thigh, the field tourniquet was slipping on mud and blood, and could not find purchase, and the man had minutes at most. Press here. Both hands, all your weight right here. She physically dragged the operator's huge gloved hands into the crease of the man's groin and pinned them there, buying seconds. She tore open a pack with her teeth, came out with a clamp, and then she did the thing that stopped the operator's heart. She drove her bare, gloved fingers straight down into the wound, past torn muscle and shredded tissue feeling hunting. Her face gone smooth and empty with a concentration that was almost peaceful, until she found the slick, pulsing end of the vessel and pinched it off against her own fingertip. There you are. She breathed. The clamp went on. She locked it with a small, precise twist of the wrist, a particular double turn, unhurried, economical, a motion that belonged to 1,000 repetitions in far worse places than this. The bleeding stopped. The big man knelt, frozen with his hands still pressed where she had put them, and he was not looking at the wound anymore. He was looking at her hands, at the ruined, scarred left one that had gone dead steady the moment it mattered, at the clamp and the particular way she had turned it, at the shape of the whole thing, the calm in the middle of the storm, the economy of a person who had done this until it stopped being a skill and became a language. His eyes came up to her face, and the frantic desperation drained out of him and left something underneath it that looked almost like fear and almost like worship. "Ferryman," the operator whispered. Nora did not look up. "Keep pressure on the low bleed, Sergeant. I have the main one." She snapped orders to Priya without breaking rhythm. "Push the TXA. Hang 2 units of O negative on the rapid line. Get me a driver for an IO in the good leg sternum if you cannot find the leg. Move!" The operator pulled off his helmet with a shaking hand. "They told us you were dead." His voice broke on it, this enormous soot-black man kneeling in a stranger's blood. "The bird that went down in the pass. They said the ferryman was gone. We had a service. I was at the service." From against the wall, Ashford found a thread of a voice. "What? What is he talking about? She is a floor nurse. She's a fill-in." The operator stood up slowly and looked at Ashford, and the look had contempt in it that needed no words. And then he looked back down at the woman kneeling in the blood with her scarred hands inside a dying man. "Floor nurse," he said, quiet and rough. "That is Lieutenant Colonel Renata Salazar. That is the best combat trauma surgeon this country ever put in a war. She carried more of us home than any 10 doctors alive." He shook his head, still not believing his own eyes. "We buried her 2 years ago." The department went silent, every eye on the kneeling woman, the rain still driving through the open doors behind them. Nora finally looked up, and for just one heartbeat, one single beat, something moved behind her eyes that was not command and was not calm, a flash of the old drowning of 200 souls and one storm, and a rope worn through the private cost of being dragged back into the water she had crawled out of. The temptation sharp and terrible to stay small, to say you have the wrong woman, to let the ferryman stay dead. It passed. It always would when there was a heart in front of her that could still be started. "Renata Salazar died in that pass, Sergeant." She said, her voice flat and level and final. "My name is Nora, and unless you want this man to be the first one I lose today, you are going to get on that radio, and you are going to tell the other 7 birds to bring everyone down, and you are going to find me a working operating room. Do you understand me?" The operator came to attention. It was pure reflex, a thing burned into him. Below thought a body responding to a voice. It had been built to obey. "Yes, ma'am." He keyed the radio at his shoulder. "All Warlock elements. This is Boone. Medical is established at the objective. Bring them all down. I say again, bring them all down." A pause, and his voice went rough again. "The ferryman is here." Outside, 7 black aircraft flared their rotors against the gray and began to fall out of the sky toward a 22-bed hospital that was about to be pushed past every limit it had. And at the center of it, kneeling in the blood, Nora Vance wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist, reached for the next clamp, and became the thing she had spent 2 years trying to bury. The doors of St. Ambrose did not close again for 3 hours. The 7 remaining aircraft came down in a ragged rolling wave, and the little parking lot in the Fur Valley became a forward operating base. The casualties came in a flood on canvas litters and over shoulders, and dragged between 2 limping men, leaving long red smears across the floor that Nora had once quietly mopped herself. 31 critical, more than 40 in all, into a building built for a sprained ankle and a bad Thursday. and Nora Vance stood at the center of it and conducted. Bay 1 blast lung, get him on oxygen, and get Ashford on that airway. Bay 2 pelvis is unstable binder, around the hips. At the level of the big bones, cinch it, do not let anyone log roll him. The abdomens line up along the far wall. I want a large bore line in every one of them, and I want them reassessed every 10 minutes. Someone owns that hallway. Who owns that hallway? She never raised her voice above the level that carried. She never hurried and never froze. She moved through the chaos like the one fixed point in a spinning room, and the room organized itself around her, the way iron filings organize around a magnet. The operators deferred to her without a flicker. They had heard the name. They passed it between themselves in the hallway low, and it changed the way they carried their wounded gentler, somehow because the ferryman was here, and that meant there was still a chance. Priya stayed on her shoulder and did not break. It happened for her about 40 minutes in. A young soldier no older than she was went gray on a litter in the hall. His lines all blown, no vein anywhere on him that would take a needle. And the resident who was supposed to be watching him had been pulled to a worse case. And for 3 seconds, Priya was alone with a dying man and no way in. "Nora," she called, and heard her own voice shake. "I cannot get access. He has nothing. I cannot." Nora did not come. She was elbow deep in someone else, and she could not come, and they both knew it. And that was the moment the whole thing turned on. "Then you make access," Nora said across the hall, not even looking, her hands never stopping. "The drill is on the cart by your knee. You put it in the front of the shin bone, 2 fingers below the flat spot, under the kneecap, on the inside point, it away from the joint. You will feel it give when you are through. You have done it on the model. This is the same. His body does not know you are new. Do it now, Priya." And Priya, 4 days, a nurse picked up the driver with hands that had stopped shaking somewhere in the last 30 seconds, and found the landmark 2 fingers below the knee, and drove the needle into the bone, and felt it give exactly the way Nora had said it would. She pushed the fluid. The young soldier's blood pressure came up off the floor. His eyes fluttered. He lived. She looked up and found Nora had glanced over 1/2 second and given her the smallest nod, and Priya understood in that instant that she would be a nurse for 40 years and never be prouder of anything than she was of the next 10 minutes, keeping that man alive with a line she had placed into bone with her own 2 hands. That was when the second kind of trouble walked in. 6 men in black tactical windbreakers came through the doors in a tight formation, and at their center was a lean man with silver hair and a charcoal suit that had no business being clean in a room like this, holding up a badge with a gold seal and a barcode, as if the badge itself were a weapon. "I am Deputy Director Grant Voss, Special Programs Oversight," he announced, loud cutting across the moans and the alarms. "As of this moment, this facility is under federal quarantine. No one enters. No one leaves. All communication is severed. The materials involved in the Antler Ridge event are classified at the highest level. A dedicated surgical element from Walter Reed is inbound and will assume all care on arrival. Until then, you will hold. You will stabilize, and you will hold." "Hold," Ashford said, and to everyone's surprise, there was steel in it. Now the steel of a man who had spent 3 hours doing the hardest real work of his life and had stopped being afraid of a suit. "Half these men bleed out if we hold. Do you understand what that word means in this room right now?" Voss's men let their jackets fall open. There were weapons under them, and then a shout came from the doors, cracked and desperate, cutting through all of it. "Make a hole! Move! We need a dock, right now. We need the ferryman." 2 operators shoved through carrying a reinforced litter between them, and on it was a man in the shredded remains of a 2-star general's uniform, and Nora turned and the world went narrow and strange for one long second. She knew the face, older, now, gray slack with shock and blood loss, but she knew it. She had read the name at the bottom of an order 100 times in the worst nights of her first year. The task force commander who had weighed the weather and judged the risk acceptable and sent her team into the storm that killed them. Major General Aaron Fenn, the man who had in every way that a signature can killed the ferryman 2 years ago. He was dying on a litter in front of her, fragment to the chest. The operator was saying fast breaking. Piece of the casing went in under the vest at the shoulder. He has been going downhill the whole flight. He stopped talking to us about a minute out. They pushed him into the last open bay. Nora snapped on fresh gloves and put her hands on him, and for that 1 second, the memory rose up so hard she could taste copper, and rain, and her scarred left hand for the first time all day trembled. Then a heart under her fingers failing, and the hand went still. She read him in seconds. His neck veins were standing out like cords. His blood pressure was collapsing while his heart raced uselessly. The fragment had gone in beside the breastbone, and the sac around his heart was filling with blood squeezing the heart until it could no longer fill an engine drowning in its own oil. Tamponade, she said. The sac around his heart is filling. It is crushing him from the outside. He is minutes from arrest. Voss pushed into the bay. Stabilize and hold. That fragment is classified ordnance. You will not open him. You will wait for Walter Reed. Nora looked at the monitor. The pressure read 50 over nothing and falling. He does not have Walter Reed. He does not have 10 minutes. His heart is going to stop in this room, on this table, unless I open his chest, right now. You are a nurse in a suit's fantasy, Voss snapped. Step back from the general. That is a direct order from federal authority. Nora peeled off her bloody gloves, pulled on a fresh pair, and snapped them at the wrist, and did not take her eyes off Voss while she did it. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Renata Salazar, she said, and her voice dropped into a register that filled the room and left no corner of it untouched. I hold a surgical clearance you do not have the rank to read. That man is in obstructive shock from a pericardial tamponade, and if your people do not clear my table in the next 5 seconds, he dies here, and every soul in this building watches you order it. Voss opened his mouth, and behind him came a sound that every man in the room knew in his spine, the heavy oiled clack of a rifle bolt, seating around. Sergeant Boone stood in the doorway, and 3 more Warlock operators had ranged themselves beside him, blood-soaked hollow, eyed their suppressed rifles up and level, and pointed with total indifference at Voss's federal agents. The colonel gave you an order, sir, Boone said, and there was nothing in his voice at all which was the most frightening thing about it. Get your people out of her way. That man on the table sent us up that mountain. She is the only reason any version of today ends with him breathing. You are going to let her work, or you are going to explain to a lot of angry men why you did not. For 3 seconds, nobody in the bay breathed. The lights hummed. The general's monitor shrieked as his heart rate climbed toward the cliff. Voss looked at the 4 operators, and he understood the thing that men like Voss understand very well, which is the exact arithmetic of power in a room. These were not men who cared about his badge. These were men who recognized 2 things, only the mission and the person who kept them alive, and to them, Renata Salazar was closer to a saint than a soldier. He raised his hands palms out and stepped back and jerked his head at his men to do the same. If he dies on your table, Voss said soft and venomous, you disappear into a hole so deep the light never finds you, Colonel. Then I had better not let him die, Nora said, already turning away. Priya, you are with me. Ashford, I need you on suction, and you do not let your hand shake. Boone, hold that door and keep everyone out who is not helping. There was no time for a sterile scrub. There was no time for anything. Fenn was gone, undersliding into the dark. his heart drowning in the sack that held it. Nora held out her hand, and Priya, not Ashford, put the blade into it, because the girl had earned her place at this table, with a needle driven into bone, and Nora had chosen her hands on purpose. Left side along the ribs, Nora said more to herself than anyone laying the blade against the skin below the general's left nipple. We open the chest, we open the sack, we take the pressure off the heart, and then we find the hole and we plug it. Priya, when the blood comes, and it will come like a broken dam, you suction where I tell you, and only where I tell you, so I can see the muscle. Ashford, when I ask for the Foley, you hand me the Foley, and the syringe already loaded. Nobody freezes. Nobody freezes on my table. She looked once around the bay at the terrified girl, and the humbled doctor, and the armed men in the door, and the drowning general who had signed her death 2 years ago, and did not yet know the woman about to save his life was the ghost he had helped bury. "Here we go," said the ferryman, and she pressed the blade to the skin and drew it across. The blade opened the skin below the ribs in one clean, unhesitating line, and the blood welled up, and Nora did not slow. "Shears," she said, and Ashford put the heavy trauma shears into her palm, and she worked the lower blade up under the muscle between 2 ribs and closed them with a wet, gristly crunch that made someone in the doorway turn away. Rib spreader. Priya had it ready. Nora seated the ratcheting device into the wound and cranked the handle in 3 hard, even pulls, and the general's chest came open, and there it was. The sac around the heart was swollen to the size of a grapefruit, dark and tight and purple, pulsing weakly, so full of blood it could barely let the heart beat inside it. The fragment had done its work and moved on. What it left behind was killing him. "There is the tamponade," Nora said. Her voice had gone flat and slow and almost gentle, the voice of a person for whom the rest of the world had ceased to exist, narrowed to a bright tunnel with a failing heart at the end of it. "Priya, when I open this sac, the pressure releases all at once, and the field fills. You have 2 seconds. Suction low at the bottom of the sac, and hold it there so I can see the muscle. Do not chase the blood around. Anchor low and let me work above your tube." "Ready, ready," Priya said. Her hands were steady. She would wonder about that for the rest of her life, where the steadiness came from, and she would never find a better answer than that Nora had told her she had it, and so she did. Nora nicked the sack. The blood came like the dam she had promised, a dark, warm flood that welled up over the general's open chest, and Priya's suction dove low and anchored and held, and for one held breath, the red parted, and the heart lay bare, thrashing wild, wounded a ragged tear in the thick muscle of the lower chamber, pumping bright arterial blood with every desperate beat. "There," Nora said. "There you are." There was no bypass machine in this building. There was no cardiac patch, no perfusionist, no cardiac surgeon on a mountain 40 minutes away, on a road that had fallen into a gorge. There was a torn heart and a pair of scarred hands, and whatever those hands could improvise, and Nora had made a bargain a long time ago in a canvas tent, with the wind screaming that the hands would do what could not be done, as long as there was a heart in front of them worth the trying. Ashford, the Foley, 16 French, and the syringe loaded with saline now. He put it in her hand, the soft rubber catheter that any hospital on earth keeps by the 100 for the humblest of purposes, and Nora threaded the tip of it through the tear in the heart wall into the chamber. Gentle, gentle feeling for the give. "This is not in any textbook you own," she said, half to Ashford, half to the room, and there was the ghost of something dry and old in it. "You will not find it in a civilian program. It is a field trick, and it is ugly, and it works." She nodded at him. "Inflate the balloon. Slow. Tell me when I say stop, Ashford pushed the plunger. Inside the wounded chamber, the small balloon swelled, and Nora drew back onto the catheter, with the lightest steady tension seating the balloon up against the inside of the tear, like a cork drawn snug into the neck of the bottle from the wrong side, and the bright, pulsing bleed from the heart wall slowed and stuttered and stopped. The monitor, which had flatlined for 3 terrible seconds during the opening, jumped caught and settled into a fast but real rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. Somebody in the doorway let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Holding," Nora said. She did not look up. Her scarred left hand kept the gentle tension on the catheter, a living cork in a general's heart, while her right reached for the needle. Now, we make it permanent. Heavy suture, and the small felt pledgets from the vascular tray. Priya, the little white squares. Ashford, you keep that balloon exactly where it is, and you do not move a hair until I have thrown my stitches around it. We close the wall behind the balloon. We deflate. We draw it out through the last gap, and we tie down. You will each do exactly one job, and you will do it perfectly. And this man will walk out of here. Are we clear? Clear." They said together, the arrogant doctor and the 4-day nurse, bound now to the same table by the same voice. For 20 minutes the world held its breath. Nora threw the sutures around the balloon one at a time, buttressing each one against the little felt squares, so the thread would not tear back through the beating muscle. Her ruined hand, somehow. The steadier of the two, her right laying the knots with an economy that Ashford would try and fail to describe to other doctors for years afterward. When the wall was closed on either side of the balloon, she had Ashford deflate it by a breath at a time, drawing it back through the last small gap, while she cinched the final stitch down behind it, so that the cork came out and the hole closed in the same held instant, and not one drop followed it. She sat back, the heart beat in the open chest, forceful hole unbleeding. Sac is decompressed. Ventricle is repaired. "Get me a chest drain and let us close him up," she said, and let out a long, shaking breath that she had been holding, it seemed for 2 years. She was wiring the breastbone shut when the doors blew open one last time, and the Walter Reed element came through them, 6 surgeons in clean scrubs with hard cases of equipment, and their lead ran to the last bay and pulled up short at the sight of it. The improvised open chest, the blood on the floor, the Foley catheter coiled in the tray, and on the monitor against every law of probability, a 2-star general with a stable rhythm and a repaired heart. "Who did this bond?" the Walter Reed surgeon said, and there was no challenge in it, only astonishment. "This is a resuscitative thoracotomy, with a balloon tamponade of a ventricular wound, in a critical access hospital. Who executed this?" Grant Voss stood at the edge of the bay, and it cost him something visible to say it, and he said it anyway. "She did." Nora did not acknowledge any of it. She finished the last twist of wire, checked her work, and stepped back from the table. She stripped off her gloves, dropped them in the bin, and walked to the steel sink in the corner, and turned the water on, and began to scrub the blood from her scarred arms, while it swirled pink, and then red, and then clear down the drain. Voss came and stood beside her, quieter now. "We spent 2 years believing you burned in that pass, Colonel. The whole community grieved you." He watched the water run. "You cannot go back to being a fill-in nurse in a valley, not after this room. We need you. The world is not getting safer. We need the ferryman." Nora shut off the water. She dried the ruined hand slowly on a paper towel. "The ferryman drowned in that pass, Director," she said. "I let her. I have carried more people across than any person should have to, and every one of them cost me something I did not get back. I am not your colonel anymore. I am a nurse in a town where the rain smells like a place I try not to think about, and I am good at it, and it is enough." She looked at him, and there was no anger in it, only a great and final tiredness. Find someone younger. Let me stay dead. I earned it. She walked past him toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped and looked at the general on the table, breathing alive the man whose signature had ended her old life. He was awake now, barely his eyes finding her face, and going wide, with a dawning impossible recognition, his mouth moving on a name he could not make sound come out of. She held his gaze for a long moment. Whatever passed between them did not need words, and did not need forgiveness. Only the plain fact of it that the woman he had helped send into the storm had just carried him back out of his own. She gave him the smallest nod one soldier to another, a closing of a book that had stayed open in both of them for 2 years. Then she let him go. She looked at Boone and his operators, and they came to attention as one, and she returned it. And that was its own kind of goodbye. And then she looked at Marla Quint and Julian Ashford, who stood together at the edge of the ruined bay, staring at her, as though the floor had opened and shown them the sea underneath the world. "Dr. Ashford," Nora said, and her voice had gone soft again, and ordinary. The voice of a fill-in nurse at the end of a long shift. "The general will need his antibiotics rotated on schedule, and someone watching that chest drain all night. That is yours." Ashford nodded mute. "Marla. Bay 3 needs a full breakdown and restock before the next shift, and the blood bank log needs every unit reconciled by hand tonight, no shortcuts." She almost smiled. "You are the best I have ever seen at a restock. It should be you." Marla Quint, who had spent 19 years making small people feel smaller, opened her mouth and found there was nothing in it, and closed it and said very quietly, "Yes. Yes, of course." "Good," Nora said. She looked at Priya last, and this time she did smile small and real. "You placed a line in bone on your 4th day, and you did not flinch. Remember that the next time somebody tells you what you are. Now go sit with bed 6. She has been alone in all this, and she is frightened, and that is the most important job in this building, and I am trusting you with it." Priya's eyes filled, and she nodded, and she went. Nora Vance picked up the navy jacket from where it had fallen 3 hours before. She pulled it back on over the scars and tied her hair back up out of her face, and became once more the quiet Phil. And that a valley full of tired people would go right on overlooking. She stepped out into the hallway past the litters and the exhausted operators and the miracle she had just made and would never mention again. At the door, she paused and glanced back at the wreckage of the most extraordinary afternoon St. Ambrose would ever see, and said to no one and to everyone, in the flat, dry voice of a woman clocking out, "I am taking my break now. I have earned my coffee." And she walked out into the rain that smelled like a mountain far away that she carried with her, always, that had brought the whole terrible day down out of a gray sky and set it at her feet. She turned her scarred face up into it for a moment and let it fall on her, and then she went to find her coffee because the ferryman had carried one more soul across the water, and the ferryman, it turned out, still did not know how to stop. Nora Vance spent 2 years teaching a whole town to overlook her, and it took 8 helicopters and a dying general to prove that the people who carry the most are often the quietest ones in the room. She never asked to be a legend. She only ever asked to be allowed to save the ones she could and then disappear. And maybe that is the truest kind of hero. There is the kind who does the impossible and then goes looking for a coffee cup. If this story moved you, if you felt your chest tighten when she pulled the pins out of her hair, do me a small favor. Tap that like button, share this with someone who needs to be reminded that quiet is not the same as weak, and subscribe for more stories about the hidden ones among us. And tell me in the comments, If you had been standing in that emergency room when the sky came apart, would you have trusted the Phil and nurse nobody ever noticed? I would love to know.